Here we're going to look at the Sapphire plugin's cartoon plugin running inside of After Effects. This is a really cool plugin. What it does is it finds the edges of an image and puts these lines around it. By default it's giving you black lines, but as I'll show you in a little bit, you can actually change the line color if you like. So it's giving you these lines around the edges and smoothing out the color palette to give the impression that the image is a hand-drawn one, cartoon or cel shaded. So to do this by hand, of course, would take you forever. You have to color correct and adjust each frame individually, but with the Sapphire plugin's cartoon plugin, you can do a pretty good job of actually applying the effect and getting a really nice result without doing too much work. So first I wanted to show you the unaffected source clip and play this through for you here. It's got a lot of nice colors to it, which will make use of adjusting the saturation control in a little bit. But I want to first go ahead and just apply the plugin. So I'm going to right click on my clip, go to my effect editor, and go to the Sapphire Stylize family and click on cartoon. So instantaneously you see it's giving me these black lines around the edges. It's limiting the color palette somewhat. And the parameters are laid out pretty straightforward from top to bottom in terms of the edges and then dealing with some of the color options. Edge width is the first one we're going to look at, and I'll just show you the edge width here. Edge width is basically just going to determine how thick, how fat the edges are. So as I go ahead and I turn that up, you can see you're fattening out the edges. You're also losing some of the detail and some of the actual cartoon look to it. What I prefer to do is take the edge width all the way down, and when you do that, you've got almost this hand-drawn, this pencil, very fine edges going around all of the image. So it's a pretty cool look there, and I'll play this back for you a little bit. However, one of the problems is you can see with those really fine edge width, you've got all these little lines on pretty much every edge in the image. There's a whole bunch of noise. So it's pretty easy to get rid of that by turning up the suppression of small edges. That's the suppress small edges option right here. And what suppress small edges does is it looks at all the shorter, smaller edges, and the higher you turn that value, the less of those edges are going to actually get any sort of edge detection, any sort of line to them. So as I go ahead and turn that up, you can see immediately it's starting to pull away a lot of the additional edges that were there, as well as edge threshold is another useful parameter. Edge threshold, what that does is it does it on more of a global scale. It looks at the length and the size of the edges, and again, for the smaller, less pronounced edges, it's actually going to not really have much of a line there. So we'll just turn that up a little bit, just to again pull away some more of the noise that's on the wall here. So we'll go back to our beginning clip here, and you can see it's still done a pretty good job of maintaining the edges around the source parts of the image, or around the defined parts of the image where you want edges, while getting rid of it in some of the other parts of the image, such as the blue sky right here, as well as the wall in the next shot. So that's some of the nice things you can do adjusting the edges. As I mentioned before, you've got some pretty funky looks for edge color. So I've got all these black lines here. Let's say I want something a little more abstract. I can just go to my edge color options here. I can actually zoom in, show you here. I click on the color wheel, and just zoom out again. And I can pick, say I want a red color. I can do that. The nice thing about After Effects is giving you that interactivity, so as you start to adjust the color palette around, it's actually going to update with these different edges. So I can go green, red, blue, any sort of funky edge you want. Just for the purpose of this, I'm going to bring it back to black, and I'll go ahead and close out of that. Another nice option are the posterize controls. Posterize, it further limits the number of colors. So really, by turning up the posterize amount here, what that'll do for you is actually go ahead and limit the color palette. I find it gives it much of a watercolor look. You can see you're really limiting the grays, the blacks, the oranges, all the different color spaces in this image to give you a really highly stylized look. And I'll go ahead and play that out for you a little bit more. And then in the color correction options, what I'd like to play with a lot is saturation, so you can actually really crank up the color intensity without blowing up any of the brightness. So if I go ahead and pull up my saturation here, you'll see you're really getting these really vivid, sharp colors without brightening up the image. I'll play this back for you here to give you, it's a pretty radical stylized look, and you can get it without doing a whole lot of work, and that's actually maybe a little bit too much. Let's take the saturation down, maybe about half to about 4 there. So again, with only adjusting a very few parameters, you can actually get a pretty cool set of looks using the Sapphire cartoon plugin.